I've done a lot of anti-apologetic videos around here where I take some theists spouting nonsensical claims and take their arguments apart piece by piece and show where they really have nothing at all worth talking about. I see religious debates going on all the time, but the one thing they rarely talk about, at least not seriously, is the only question that actually matters in these debates, the one thing that every other aspect of theology is predicated upon. Does their God actually exist in the real world? Now, we've all seen the videos on YouTube where theists make claims about the existence of God, where they insist that God is real and tell you all about what God is like and what God wants. But as I've pointed out time and time again, none of these theists have any means of actually knowing if these claims that they're making about their imaginary friends in the sky are actually true. I mean, how do they know? How have they tested their claims to find out if they're factually correct? And the answer, as should be painfully obvious, is that they haven't. They have faith, totally blind and completely irrational faith. They trust ancient books of mythology for their answers and place their unfounded trust in unjustified and unsupported quasi-historical figures who are ignorant of the world around them. Now, I know I've said this before, but it's a question worth repeating because nobody's taking it seriously. Why should we bother talking about doctrinal issues when the figure at the core of your doctrine is totally unproven? What's the point of talking about salvation from sin when we haven't established that sin exists at all or that there's anyone who can take your sin away? It's like debating the magical properties of a unicorn's horn without first establishing that unicorns are real. What's the point? Are you actually establishing anything, or are you just wasting your time? I figure that without holding the theist accountable for this first question and allowing them to just go running down the primrose path, we're all just wasting our time. Even in so-called professional debates where you get a Richard Dawkins or a Bart Ehrman or a Dan Barker or Sam Harris debating professional apologists, you rarely ever get them talking about the existence of God, and even when they do, it just doesn't last because the apologist has nothing to actually present. I can count on less than one hand the number of these debates that I've seen where the atheist debater has said, "Now hold on a second, you haven't actually presented any objective evidence for your beliefs or any rationale for your positions. We're not going to go on until you do." Yeah, I know if they actually did that, they wouldn't get any more debate gigs and they wouldn't get paid, but let's be honest, is this about the paycheck or the subject matter? If every single atheist debater held their theist opponent to this single question, how would the religious look? I mean, I know the fanatics wouldn't care, but to everyone else, the religious would look like the idiots they actually are. They'd be terrified to engage in debates at all. They'd stay in their churches and preach to the choir and refuse to engage anyone outside their echo chamber because they'd know what they've got coming. And it isn't like they can develop a decent defense because they simply don't have any actual evidence. And I know what some people are going to say, especially the religious, but it's a philosophical issue, and we have philosophical arguments. No, it isn't a philosophical issue any more than the existence of Bigfoot is a philosophical issue. They're arguing for the existence of an entity that has a measurable impact on reality and has objective characteristics that they claim to have some method of knowing. That's not a philosophical issue. It's a scientific one, or at least potentially so. Because the question isn't what do you believe, it's why do you believe it, and should you believe it? That's really the question we ought to be asking theists. Is this something that rational people ought to believe? And I know that theists are not, by and large, rational in their beliefs. But again, this is something we ought to be holding them accountable to and pointing out when they fail, because theist claims look exactly like any other claim made about the real world. We need to hold them equally accountable to the same standards as other claims make. It would be a logical mistake to create a double standard for the religious or allow them to hold to one, just like it would be foolish to allow cryptozoologists to demand a double standard for proof about Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. There's one standard, it works fine, stick with it until you can prove with evidence that it doesn't work. This is, of course, going to make the theists whine and cry and stomp their precious little feet because I think deep down they know they've got nothing. That's why they run and hide from the truth, because they hold their beliefs for emotional and not intellectual reasons. They believe because they want it to be true, not because they have any good reason to think that it is. And I think that the fastest, most effective way to speed religion to its inevitable doom is to point this out. Not only to hold up the mirror of reason to the believers, but to make sure they know that we know what's going on. They need to be embarrassed by their rational failures. Now, it won't change the minds of the fanatics. Those people just have to die off. But it certainly will make the moderates, the people who, I think, know that what they believe is ridiculous, but they're doing it for emotional and social reasons. Would it work? I don't know. It certainly wouldn't hurt, but it would require that atheist debaters get on the same page, and as we all know, getting atheists to do anything is like herding cats. So while I think it's a good idea, and it is the basis of my 30-second debating tactic, I don't really think it will actually get anywhere. And that's unfortunate. So what do you think? Do you agree with me that we shouldn't continue to ignore the imaginary elephant in the room? Or do you think we ought to just keep spinning our wheels and letting theists control the narrative? Because that's really what's happening. We don't ask the central question, and when we do, we let them wave their hands around and pretend they're making some sort of sense, when I think we all know they're not. And for the theists, why is that? Why do you refuse to acknowledge that you can't actually prove that your gods are real, and you don't actually know anything about them, yet you pretend to because it makes you feel good? At least be honest and admit that. Let me know in the comments, and let's have a rational discussion. I'm not holding my breath, but hey, stranger things have happened.